Jonathan. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here, Megan.
I've been looking forward to this chat. I love your energy. I love your enthusiasm. And I know we're going to have a great conversation.
We definitely will. It's going to be awesome.
So before we dive into our topic that is all related to culture and building a culture within your business, can you tell our listeners that don't know you just a little bit about you and how you got to where you are in the industry now?
Absolutely. I mean, it's funny. I'm smiling to myself, before we got on, just talking about where we are now and having almost 40 employees. A couple of those are independent contractors, but the majority of people are employees. And if you would have told me 2 years ago, when we basically shut everything down, that we would be here so quickly again, I would have said you're crazy. And then before that, we had almost 900 employees doing all part-time stuff, some contractors, obviously, but we got into this industry in staffing. And so we're no stranger to employees and working with people. And we had, still to the best of my knowledge, the best, highest rated, best customer service from any staffing company in the Southern California area. And, our reviews and our ratings are still all on there. And it's something that I'm really proud of. But it all came from me starting in hospitality. I mean, at 15, I worked at my aunt's deli up in Sonoma, near Napa, wine country up there in California. And we just washing dishes. I think I was responsible at one point for drizzling the white chocolate on top of the, the strawberries, the chocolate covered strawberries, and, bussing and doing a little bit of everything because it was a family run business. And then that, my first job was at Trader Joe's, which again is kind of famous for its culture and the way that
Trader Joe's.
Love Trader. Like, who doesn't love Trader Joe's, right?
Yeah.
And that really instilled in me. And then, also there were some family influences there. My mother and my grandmother just really impressed it upon me that how you do things really matters. Not just what you do, but how you do them. And so fast forward, going through college, I had 5 different jobs all at the same time. It was hard for me to really stay focused on one thing because I loved getting the job, but I really struggled. I would get bored, right? And so, so my wife and I, we meet, we have, our son, we're going through college, and it's like, well, we need to either start a business or we need to get a job. Like, what are we going to do here? And, I started picking up shifts for a catering company here in the area, and they liked the level of work and the level of kind of intention that I put behind my work. And I got my wife to join, and they liked her. And then I got my siblings to join and my wife's siblings. So we kind of started with the family unit, and we have pretty big families, both of us. So it grew off of that. Their friends, their college, classmates, and we just kept it growing. And at that point was kind of like, okay, this is a real business. This is something that we can really focus on growing. And that took us to where we are now. We actually sold that staffing company just very, very recently. And we really pivoted full-time into professionally managing wedding and event venues. And so that's what we do now. And we also have a bunch of resources on hiring and on team building that we're releasing. A course that's going to be coming out soon. I'm going to be speaking later, all about culture, hiring. I love the people aspect of this so much. And it can get nasty and it can get challenging, but it's something that I really love and I'm really passionate about. So I'm excited.
Man, I love your enthusiasm, and I can tell that the relationships and the people and the building a culture, that's your wheelhouse. That's your superpower for sure.
I definitely love it. I think some people really love computers because of the dependability, kind of like that it's not going to freak out and do something. And people aren't dependable, right? Like there are those, crazy instances, and I have so many stories and experiences of different things, but at a core level, I think it's a leader's responsibility and job to really try to understand what's important to his team and hire based on that, the culture that he hopes to hold or she hopes to hold in the company, and then just work in kind of that inverted pyramid model of, the boss on the bottom instead of the boss on the top, and just support your team. And that's how I run the company that we do now. And that's how I tell anyone who's a leader in our company that they need to act as well. So it's definitely something I think that we can be a force for good, not only in this industry, but hopefully in other industries as well.
I love it. So when it comes to culture, which is what we're going to talk about on today's episode, What do you define culture as within a business?
So culture for me, I think has been, it's been an evolution, because I used to think about culture, like when someone would say culture, just like you said to me, I would immediately go to Apple or Google and think about the slides and think about the ping pong tables and think about the free lunch and like all of the goodies, right?
Yeah.
And there's this whole concept behind the great resignation, that's going on right now, and the change that COVID has brought. And I think that the shift has been, culture is less something that sits on a plaque, in a work hall, but isn't really lived and acted out on a daily basis. I think it's shifted and people really realize the impact that it has, because culture it's the air that exists within the company. It's the way people walk and talk. And I think it relates to the worldview that the owners hold, that the shareholders hold, that the employees hold, and it's gotta be consistent throughout. And far too often what I've found is there are subcultures, and there's kind of this culture that's talked about, which could be, we stand for hard work and inclusion and diversity and all these different things, these beautiful platitudes that sound great on a plaque. And it's like, yeah, clap it up. That's great. And it's something that we want to talk about on podcasts and share on YouTube videos. But when we actually get down to it, there's a subculture that exists, and the day-to-day execution of how we live our lives doesn't fall in line with those. And so, again, thinking about culture more as like the worldview and the lens that we look at the world, at our clients, at the roles, at each other, right? It's so easy to say we have a positive work environment when you're always complaining about like Sue, who you work with, right? So that's really how I think about culture. And I hope that more people can start thinking about it like that, because it ends up reducing the amount of friction that you have when one thing that's coming out of your mouth is, positivity is important, or, whatever, hard work is important, but then you can't get the owner to show up to do work because he's too focused on like being the boss.
So it's the actions, it's the actual way that you show up, not just what you say your business is about, like living that day to day. Is that what I'm hearing?
100%. You have to walk the walk. It can't be something, and people see through that. People are so smart. Employees are smart. Contractors are smart. Everyone, like humans, are smart. So yeah, 100%.
How important is culture when you're a really small business? So let's say you are a solopreneur, or you have 2 to 3 team members that you're starting to grow, and you want to take your business to the next level. I think sometimes we think about culture just like you said, like we think Google, we think Apple, we think like these bigger businesses, but how important is culture in a small business?
I'm so glad you asked that question, and it's such a good question, because I do think that for smaller businesses, especially businesses in our industry, catering companies, even venues where you have an owner operator, a planning company, a florist, oftentimes it's, you're a solopreneur, you maybe have 1 employee part-time, and there's obviously quite a bit of a transient workforce as well, temp workers who are coming in to help for the specific event, and due to the seasonality of our industry as well, these people kind of flow in and out. So I love that question, because culture, again, when you think about culture in terms of the slides and the free lunches and like all of the goodies and the benefits, it makes it feel like culture is something that a small business doesn't have to focus on. And I firmly believe that when a small business owner, even if you're just a solopreneur, but if a small business owner can, in the very beginning, decide the culture that they want to have, and I think a lot of the culture leans on the priorities, right? If the priorities of the owner, the solopreneur, are now felt throughout the business, And now all of a sudden you hire someone on, whether they're a contractor or whether it's your first employee, someone part-time. Now all of a sudden your values, the way that you look at the world, your priorities are evident. And if you're able to align those with the priorities and the values of the person that you hire on, now all of a sudden you have this clear channel where the other person that you've hired is able to focus on their work, and they're able to do so passionately because they also believe in the similar things that you believe. Of course, all of the opinions don't have to be aligned. That's not what I'm talking about. But, when you as the owner start inserting a little bit of your culture, right? Your priorities into everything, including the marketing and the sales process and like whatever that is. But when you find a way to really be authentically you and not be afraid to show a little bit of who you are, meaning the stuff that you're passionate about, maybe your family, right? Maybe your pets, maybe you're a cat person, right? Maybe you have a crazy colored iguana. I don't know, right? But what is different? What is interesting about you? And then also, what is some pain that you've experienced? And this is something that I feel like people really shy away from. Not to play the victim card, but what is some pain or some hardship or some struggle that has informed your growth, your current growth? And how does that drive and motivate you to do what you're doing? Because that kind of gives this anchoring. And so again, taking it back to the small business owner, when you do that, when you hire that first one or two people, as a small business owner, we're wearing all the hats, right? You're wearing the podcast host hat along with a million other hats, mom, everything else. And that's just, socially. Professionally, you've got a bunch of other hats you're wearing. And I know that people can relate to that who are listening right now. But when you're able to hire people who have that alignment, they have a personal buy-in, they have an emotional buy-in, and you don't have to micromanage them as much. You don't have to constantly be checking in with them. And there's a level of trust that automatically happens that feels effortless when you make the right hire. And that can definitely be done by aligning, what you have to offer, the values that you have to offer, the lessons that you've learned from the pain that you've experienced inside your business. And so when someone touches you, they kind of get a little bit of that. They love it. And then they're able to do their job with more energy, more enthusiasm. And it shows up in sales. It shows up everywhere across your company.
I love that, Jonathan. I feel like this needs a worksheet from you that's like, okay.
I probably need to come up with one.
I love it. I'm just like imagining this because I know in my conversations with small business owners, oftentimes I think they need help getting out of their head and seeing where they're headed to with their business. And sometimes they get stuck in that like, but it's just me, like I'm doing all the things. But the goal is for that to not always be the case, right? Like to get to the next level and to do that, knowing what kind of culture you want to create based on the pain points that you've probably learned as a business owner. I really love that combination.
One thing that I also, I'll say this. When my wife and I started our company, we were both in college. We were at the tail end of college. And one thing for us, we felt like we didn't have a lot of direction, right? And I think anyone going out of college can relate to that, especially now. You're like, my gosh, I could be a TikTok influencer and just blow up and not ever need a job, or I should be a doctor, but that's hard, and in med school, and I don't know, and maybe there's the military, my uncle was in, oh no, I don't want to do that, and maybe there's all these options, and there's all this, and the world is huge, right? And so for me, that was very overwhelming. For my wife, she thought she was going to go into political science, and then she married me, and it was, totally just stirred her world up a little bit in a different direction. But I remember feeling that feeling. And so for me, kind of the pain of the growth process and evolving to who I feel like I was meant to be, which was an entrepreneur, a business owner, a leader in this category, that pain I remember feeling. And so a motivator for me was to allow the young people who worked with us to try to touch as many different parts of the business as possible, and even facilitate opportunities for them to go and talk to people who were in my network who were doctors, who were lawyers, who did have other professional experiences. Because at the end of the day, especially for a lot of these roles, like they're not full-time roles. Someone who's working with you probably is not going to spend the next 10 to 20 years working with you. They might, hopefully they do, but we're in a different work type of cycle. So as the owner, if you're able to see that and not try to make the culture something around like, okay, we're hoping to capture you and hold you here in the business, but instead like, hey, I want you in your stay in this life hotel that you're in with us. I want this to be the best life hotel you're ever going to experience. And when you move on to your next role, I want you to take so many amazing experiences and professional development and everything. And even as a florist, if you're going to go into finance, those are two different things. But I've heard so many stories of the pros that I've even talked to on my podcast where they apply the things that they learn back and forth throughout all sorts of different industries. So I think it is a mindset shift, to your point.
I love it. Do you think that when you are hiring and growing your team, like where should you be talking about your culture? Because you don't want it to be like, here's my plaque of what my company is all about, but are you talking about it in the interview process? Are you putting it out there in your verbiage and your messaging? Like is that more internal? What do you think?
I think that for culture to not die before it ever has a chance to live and grow, it has to be real. And the reality of our day-to-day workflow is not this crazy polished, let me fix my tie really quick. I'll share with you something that happened today, actually. There was a little bit of an overlap. Someone who helps us with the kids wasn't quite here yet, and I had an interview that was coming up with an employee that we're hiring. And, I could very easily have tried to adhere to this kind of strict level of professionalism, and I want to clearly convey that we're a serious business trying to do serious work. And like, I could have done that, or I could have said, hey, look, we're in an environment, I have my kids here. This is not going to be as maybe professional as I would have hoped, but I am going to live out the culture that I hope to have, which is I'm a parent. I'm a dad of going on 5, and I also want to accomplish things with my life. I also want to be at the top of my game in business, but I value my relationships with my kids and my wife and our team. And so I am not going to give them the stiff arm in favor of trying to appear and create this fake environment. So you talked about where it should show up. I think that it needs to show up in the very beginning. I think it needs to show up on the job post. I think more business owners need to speak from the heart instead of having this very scripted out job posting, because I don't think that that accurately conveys the realistic culture that's going to exist inside a business when you put this, paragraph of how you're, whatever it is, and then a couple of different bullet points. And then on the flip side of that, you want to have a good environment for people to come in and start interacting with your brand. So you can't just be like, oh my gosh, I'm a hot mess. I know you can't hear me and I'm going to be turning off the video every now and then and like throw them into chaos. You don't want to do that either. So you have to find that balance of like, what is the real experience that they're going to have with you? What do you prioritize, and how can you actually show up and show them that? Not just write it in a job post, not just like put it on an Instagram post, on your feed, but how do you walk it? Again, going back to like walking the talk?
Are there accountability checkpoints for you as a leader to make sure that you're still walking the walk? That question just came to me as I was thinking about, like, in the wedding industry, or the event industry in general, like we get real busy. And as small business entrepreneurs, I see so many of us, and I've been in and out of this state as I've been different points in my business where I'm very in the trenches, right? And sometimes things get a little crazy and you start to lose track of your why in business, or perhaps like you just get buried in the weeds stage of growth. How do you, or what would you say, give advice to someone that is like, how do you stay accountable to your culture as a leader?
I love that question. I have 3 different points that I think could be helpful.
Awesome.
The first one is I think that personal accountability is dramatically underrated. And what I mean by that is understanding your role, how you show up in your company, where you do your best work, and, kind of keeping control of yourself. It's very, very difficult, but that has made in my own experience, it's made a huge difference. So kind of some of that self-work, I think, would be point number 1. Point number 2 is you can't see what's going on at scale when you're looking at it so close, right? And if you're so close to the problem, it doesn't allow you to look left or right and see anything going on in your business, in how you're treating people, even in your own self, right? Maybe the impact that the workload is having on you. And a lot of times we have a very skewed impression of time, and it feels like we're always out of time. I don't have any time. I don't know, and whether it's I haven't made the time or I don't have time, there is this constant lack of this finite resource we have, right? Mm-hmm. And one thing that I've really learned is we do have more time than we think we do. Oftentimes there are pieces of our day that are little time eaters and we aren't aware of them. And so, when you're able to take a step back, and whether that's, taking a Monday off. In fact, that's something that we recently did in our company. We have Mondays. It sounds like you do the same thing. Taking Mondays off after a busy week, but not just taking Mondays off and just immediately jumping into the other busyness of life, but actually just taking a moment to say, how did that feel? How did that, and I say, how did that feel? Not to say, oh, it was so hard and feel bad for yourself, but to say, how did that feel? Like, did I show up for my company? Did I show up for my team? Did I show up for my clients? Or was the whole time friction, and was I fighting, and was I exhausted, and was I drained, and am I miserable, right? You kind of have to go back there. And there are sometimes the tiniest hinges that swing the biggest doors, right? We've all heard that, I think. But there are sometimes those tiny little pieces that really make a huge difference. And sometimes it might be, not taking a phone call. Like, I know, bless my mom. I love her. Mom, if you're listening to this, I love you, but I can't take a call from my mom in the middle of the day because I know that we're going to talk about a lot of important things for 2 hours. It's a simple time adjustment. I can't afford it then. I maybe could afford it later on, right?
Yeah. I love that, by the way. I haven't heard that tiniest hinge swings the largest door. I've never heard that before.
Okay. Sweet. Yeah, awesome.
It's great.
And then I had one last thing to add to that. We have to gain perspective, right? So stepping back a little bit, figuring that out, owning yourself and your kind of current state. But the final point, as far as getting perspective, kind of understanding how you are implementing culture or not implementing culture, is to realize that regardless of what you think is happening or not, there is culture happening. There's a subculture happening. There is a experience that someone is going to have with your brand that if you aren't being intentional about creating for them, it is being created for them by someone else, by an employee that you have. And so that is a scary thought to think about, right? And so if we have that perspective that I talked about, we're able to step back. I think it's important to take a really honest look at what's going on in the company. What's the experience look like from the outside? And getting that perspective is often hard alone. So this third point is to enlist some help, or to try to find a way to get as objective a opinion as possible from someone who's outside your environment. And I think you can do this in any aspect of your business. It's tougher with culture because obviously culture is this kind of internal thing that someone would really have a hard time experiencing unless they're in your company. But you can ask, what's the feeling? You can ask your clients. You can go out and talk to your clients. And maybe if you haven't had that one-on-one relationship with a bride, you're coordinating her wedding, the assistant is handling it, or one of your other planners that work with you, right? You can go wrap around and say, hey, how was the experience? But you have to be ready to hear things that you don't like, and you have to be ready to not respond emotionally. Because I think that is, I've been, you know, you hear something and you're like, oh, that kind of stings. And then you want to lash out. Someone needs to be fired, right? Like, we need to fix this. And I mean, that's a humbling moment because you realize like everything is my fault.
That is a humbling moment,
you know?
For sure. There were two things that you said that I wanted to touch on. One was that like personal accountability and when you were talking about being so in the depths of your business and not being able to see left from right. I love the idea of pulling back and checking in with yourself. One, right? Like asking yourself this week, like, it was a blur, but when I look back on this week, like, what am I proud of? What were my pain points in my decisions that I made? What would I go back and do differently? And then what do you do with that information? You can't just ask those questions and then keep doing the same thing. It's like, what am I going to, so next week when my mom calls in the middle of the afternoon, I'm going to send her one of those custom texts. It's like, I love you. I'll call you later. Right?
Yep. I should probably make that a custom text on my phone, one of the autoresponders. I should totally do that.
I love you. I'll call you later. Just be careful who you send that to.
Oh,
yeah.
Seriously. Yeah. One of your clients like, wait, what?
I love you too.
Yeah.
I love that. And then Jonathan, I was like, gosh, I feel like you need a whole new business called Culture RX, where you're going into different brands. And if there's anyone that I think could have a candid, like heartfelt, warm conversation and get a sense of the culture within a business, it's you. Like people would open up to you, right? And just, you could go back to a business owner and say, hey, in these conversations with your team, like here are the things that came up and here are the amazing things that are going on within your culture. And then here's some of that beneath the surface subculture that you may not even be aware of. Do you do that?
You know, I don't. And it's to my brain, my entrepreneurial, distracted, shiny object syndrome driven brain. You're like feeding me all sorts of serotonin. Like my brain is just going off. I'm going to have to start a new business and my wife's going to hate me.
Sorry.
I love it. It's such a good idea. It's such a good idea because we're so subjective.
We are. And I think what's interesting is that you mentioned the idea of getting that outside perspective, and you can ask your clients and you can ask other people, but you bring such a wealth of knowledge and understanding of what makes a good culture. It just seems like something that someone could be listening to this and being like, okay, I hear the value in it. I hear what he's saying, but truly digging deep and understanding where we're at and where the pain points are, like that feels overwhelming to me. And I don't know, it just seems like such an interesting opportunity.
Yeah, no, I am so excited about that. And I'm going to just ask you all the questions about your brainchild that you've just had here after we get off. But I had two things. You were saying this and I realized it can feel overwhelming. And I think that there's this messaging that is sent to us across the industry that like, oh my gosh, I'm so overwhelmed. This is hard. My clients are difficult. There's a lot of that. It's a lot I hear, right? And we deal with hundreds and hundreds of clients across the venues that we manage because it's a done for you business service. I mean, we are running the business. So we're dealing with the clients, we're dealing with the vendors, we are dealing with the owners, right? So there's a lot of dynamics going on. I get the overwhelm feeling. But one thing that I've noticed is I think it's important when we take self-care in our industry that we are very careful how we take that self-care and we call it what it is. And let me explain before all your audience hates me and they feel like I'm being insensitive. I think that we say we're going to have self-care and then we end up, down at the bar, basically. Having a beer, kicking back with our friends. I'm speaking from personal experience. For the ladies out there, it could be, going to the winery and having, a bottle of wine with your friends. It could be doing some of these things. And I think there is a level of that is very healthy and important. But at the same time, if what else is on your plate is a family and pets and everything else, and you have those 1 or 2 days that you've designated as self-care, and you spend them in a way that even though you're labeling it self-care, you're not actually doing that deep work. And Megan, that's what you were talking about, right? That reflection. And what do you do with the information? That's tough. That takes discipline. It takes so much discipline not to call up your bestie and be like, hey, I don't have anything on Monday. I don't have any client calls till Tuesday. Let's go out and do this, where you could be spending some quiet time, right? That takes a level of discipline, and that takes a level of intentionality. And so I don't think that we should be calling that like self-care and needing a break. Like, let's call that what it is, because that's not going to necessarily fill your tank. That's going to maybe make you feel good for a little bit. May or may not be a hangover associated with that. But on the flip side of that, you're going to wake up Tuesday, Wednesday, maybe feeling a little foggy, maybe not feeling as great, maybe having the same exact problems that you were really hot on Saturday night when you were like, this whole thing is a dumpster fire. I need to implement these 3 systems, blah, 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 blah. But then kind of it fades away a little bit. You have your self-care day, and it really just puts a Band-Aid over it. It doesn't actually solve the problem. So bringing that back to the overwhelm, if you're listening to any of this right now and you're like, oh my gosh, like I thought that I had stuff on my plate now, and now this guy's telling me that I have to, do all this culture stuff, and I only have, an assistant who is my best friend, and I have someone else, and like, I don't need to do all that. It's not as complicated as making a mission statement and getting into values and all of that. I think it's just going back to square one internally and just saying, what do I really care about? What do I want to look like? My company. Why am I doing this business? And for some people, it might be because they love the design and they love the art of it. And that's okay, but you have an obligation for your clients to grow an incredible company that allows you and gives you the infrastructure to thrive and excel. You shouldn't be doing accounting. You shouldn't be doing operations. You shouldn't be doing sales. You need to be focusing on your art. So whether you are an artist or whether you are an operator, right? It's a requirement, I think, to really understand how you're going to grow your business to the point that you can outsource the things that you're not good at. And to do that, it takes a level of understanding the culture, understanding what's important to you, understanding how you want people to show up in your business, and using some of those break days and those self-care days to kind of do this fundamental work. But it will take discipline. And I promise you, it sounds a lot more scary than it is. Because when you take that 30 minutes and you actually sit down with a pen and paper, or I would say pen and paper too, because I'm horrible. There you go.
Yes, I'm holding up my pad and paper right now.
It's great though. I'm just like, you know what? I'm going to do it on my phone. No problem. And I have my phone, and then 6 Slack notifications later and a Honeybook notification, and then I'm off to the races.
Instagram.
My goodness. DMs. It's all important, and then my mom calls.
I have so been there, Jonathan. Yes, I agree. I think pen and paper is the way to go. And I would say make it just as important as it is a client meeting, like a paid client meeting. Like, carve out that time and start small. I mean, I speak from experience here. I didn't used to do this at all because it felt like something I would fail at. And I'm a 3 on the Enneagram. So if I can't do it really, really well, then I don't want to touch it.
Yeah.
And I'm pushing back on that mindset. It's like, you know what, even if I'm going to set aside 5 minutes a day and write down a little bit of like just evaluation of where I'm at with my goals. Because right now, this episode is coming out. We're almost through. Well, shit, I don't know when this episode's going to come out. Let me come back. Jason will edit this. Okay. We're
I love it. Love it. No, it's so good. It's so cool too that he's going to be listening to this later laughing. It's going to be so great.
I know. I'm going to have to, because I'll have to remind him, I'll be like, sorry, it went really, really well until like 40 minutes in. Okay, let me start over. And, you know, I think it's one of those things too, that at the beginning of each year, we set these goals and we're like, okay, I'm going to be a totally different person. I'm going to do all these things different, but it's okay to sit down and just kind of check in with how things are going. It doesn't mean you have to make a massive list of all the ways that you have to adjust how you're running your business. It's just understanding what you're enjoying, where your skill set is, and maybe the time sucks of the day that you spoke about. That really resonated with me. But put it on your calendar and hold yourself accountable.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, I am such a classic case of struggling with this. And so if you're listening to this right now and you struggle with it too, I'm right there with you. You do have to be intentional. And again, coming back to that quote, small hinges do swing big doors. And you'd be surprised, even though you don't have this perfect session of, getting your mindset right and feeling motivated, and like, you don't have to do that. It doesn't have to be all that. It just takes a little bit, like a little ounce of time, and it will have these large ripple effects.
And it's okay to fall off the horse and get back on. I say that for my perfectionists that are listening to this and those achievers, because for me, it's like, once I stop doing it, I'm quick to write it off as like, well, didn't succeed there. I guess I'll check that off the list of things I won't try to do anymore. But it's okay. It's okay to say, I did not have that weekly check-in. It just didn't happen for the last 2 weeks, but I'm gonna try again. I'm gonna get back to it.
Megan, I want to add something about the culture and hiring and just dealing with people. I think a lot of times it feels like something doesn't work, right? I've heard that a lot. Oh, we tried that. That didn't work, right? Mm-hmm. And I think there's a lot of stories and narratives that we even pick up from other people around us. And we end up living someone else's story. Or we end up living the conclusions that they've made after living their own story. I'll give you a perfect example. I have family members who have run businesses and they've run them into the ground. I've had family members who have, trusted people, and those people have betrayed the trust, right? I have people that I know who really, the thought of bringing on employees is the worst thing possible to them. And it's because they have had an experience in the past that informs that decision. And they'll say, oh, it doesn't work, right? Mm-hmm. And so to your point, maybe it's not that it doesn't work, it's just you didn't do it the right way, And when you're new in business or fairly young in business, a couple years in, not young in age necessarily, but like new in business, you've got to understand that you have to write your own story. You have to have your own experiences. Like, look for some of those guideposts that the experiences of others are going to show you, but you can't take the information about people and hiring and culture and all of these things. You can't take that from your uncle who got screwed over out of $20,000 from a sales rep one time back in 1987. Like,
I love that. I love that, Jonathan. That advice really hits, because I've talked about this before on the podcast. I have an episode called your circle of trust, like your own personal advisory board. And I mentioned that it's like, you have to remember that you are at the head of the table, right? And the people that sit at that table with you, you may love your uncle and he may have some really great stories, but he shouldn't have insight and have a buy-in into how you run your business if he's not in the trenches doing the work, right?
Yes. Preach. Yeah. Amen. I love that. I love that, because people, I think in the effort to do better, I guess, they're like, I'm just going to take advice from everywhere. And it's so important to filter the worldview that someone is speaking that through, the experiences that someone's speaking that through, and don't own that. You know what I mean? Don't own the failure there. That's not your failure to own. And you can hear the lesson that they may have said, but you have to distinguish between a lesson and then a way that they just screwed up that you're not going to screw up. And you can't just say, oh, I tried posting on Instagram once or twice. It didn't work for me. Like, imagine if everyone lived their life like that, right?
I know.
It wouldn't work out.
No. Well, Jonathan, as we are wrapping up our conversation, what are if someone has listened to this episode, and I can't imagine, I mean, there's been so many moments that I personally have been inspired by what you've said, but what would be if they hear nothing else, what's the final takeaway from this conversation?
You need to always be hiring.
I love
that's the message. And we really haven't talked about hiring as much as culture, but for any company, I firmly believe, and even if you don't want to grow a big company, you might be hearing that saying, turn the podcast off. Like we're fine. I don't want to grow a big company, right? I love taking 30 couples a year. I love taking 60 couples a year. I love what I do now. But if you are not actively scouting for incredible people, you are robbing yourself of living up to your greatest potential and showing up in the most authentic way possible in your organization. Mm-hmm. And I think that people assume that since they don't have an aspiration of running or feel like they can run a 10 or 20 or $30 million business, that they don't need heads of different departments or they don't need some of these things. And you may not need it right now. And you may not have to grow a big, massive company, $30 million. You may not even, want to do that. That may not even be in the cards for you or what you're here doing, because you have to audit that. You have to know that, right? But if you are not actively looking for people that you can share your beliefs about the world, about the industry, you can give them something of value during their life hotel time.
I love that.
Time with you, right? If you aren't looking for that, you will end up in a position where you don't have quality people around you. And because you haven't developed any relationships with people that you would love to have working for you, you won't have anywhere to go and you'll have zero leverage as you're concerned about the people that you do have in your organization. So if I could leave anyone with a little bit of information, always be hiring. Make hiring cards. Make 1,000 of them.
I like that.
Yeah.
I like that.
Make it like a cool, secret, fun thing. And give it to your barista. Give it to your smoothie maker. Give it to the server who did a great job. Give it to someone that you see, a coach. Give it to somebody. And worst case scenario, they check out what you do and you might end up coordinating an event for them or their family member. Best case scenario, you find somebody who's looking for an opportunity, who digs that card up in 3 months after they are dissatisfied with the current role they're at, and they come and they're a rock star for you and they totally transform your business and your life.
Oh, so good. And I think consider this Jonathan and the universe telling you, you don't have to wear all the hats for all the days. It's time to take off some of the hats. Oh, I love that.
Yes, 100%. All of the hats. You can wear them maybe on different days once in a while, but you can't stack them up. Don't do it. Don't do it.
No. Jonathan, where can someone that is listening to this and wants to learn more, where can they connect with you?
So a couple different places depending on what they're interested in. You can connect with me personally and more increasingly content that I'm putting out about culture and hiring on my Instagram, Jono Aymin. Just a nickname I picked up somewhere along the way. JONOAYMIN on Instagram. Jonathan Aymin on Facebook. And then you can also check out the podcast. And actually, you should go check out the podcast that Megan's been on the Venue RX. But that is the Venue RX, like venue prescription, the Venue RX at Instagram. And you can get all of our amazing content for venues there. As well as some of the hiring and culture stuff that we inevitably end up talking about there as well.
I love it. Thank you so much for coming on the show. This episode, I had my own aha moments when you talked about pain points and culture that can evolve and grow, because I really think about over this last decade plus of being in our industry, who I was version 1 leader versus version 2 leader and the culture shifts that I've had to make to continue to grow. You gave such great insight.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's really been a pleasure. And your podcast, I regularly listen actually. And
Thank you.
I love the guests that you have on, and the insight to the industry and wedding and event pros, I think is super valuable. So thank you for everything that you do for our industry.
I love it. Thanks, Jonathan.
All right. Take care.